The bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang through the air like a cry from heaven itself. The whole world seemed to pause. The massive square outside the Vatican was filled with thousands, eyes lifted, breaths held, hearts racing. Something big was about to happen, something that hadn't happened in centuries. Then, from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, a plume of white smoke danced into the Roman sky. White smoke, the sign everyone had been waiting for. A new pope had been chosen. In that one sacred moment, the world shifted. The faithful gasped, wept, and fell to their knees. Cameras zoomed in, reporters spoke in hushed voices, and news stations across the globe flashed the words, Habemus. Papa, we have a pope. But this was not just any pope. When the figure finally stepped onto the balcony above the square, the silence was deafening. Draped in simple white, his head slightly bowed, stood a man from the Philippines, Luis Antonio Tagle. The moment he was announced as Pope Luis XIV, the crowd exploded in celebration. From the cobbled stones of Vatican City to the smallest villages in the Philippines, joy erupted like never before. For the first time in modern history, the Catholic Church had chosen an Asian pope. A humble son of Manila had become the vicar of Christ. The Philippines, a nation whose people had long worn their Catholic faith like a second skin, wept, tears of joy. Streets filled with dancing, church bells rang in every province, and people clutched each other with trembling hands. The cries of Mabuhay ang Santo Papa echoed from every island. This was not just a win for Filipinos. It was a moment of triumph for the entire developing world. Pope Luis XIV was not just a symbol. He was a servant, a scholar, a shepherd. His journey was not one of privilege, but of perseverance. Born into a modest family in Manila, young Luis Tagle had always felt a quiet, unshakable calling. As a boy, he served in his local church. He swept floors, lit candles, and learned to listen, not just to words, but to people's hearts. Even as he studied theology, earning degrees that impressed scholars around the world, he never left behind the simplicity of his roots. His laugh was warm and unforced. His love for the poor was unshakable. As a parish priest, he remembered the names of every child. As a bishop, he walked through slums barefoot, sitting beside mothers who had lost their babies and giving them the only thing he could, his presence. People called him Chito, his childhood nickname, and he let them. Now that same man had become Pope Luis XIV, the most powerful spiritual voice on earth. And yet, nothing about him screamed power. Everything about him whispered humility. In his first address as Pope, he didn't talk politics. He didn't issue decrees. He looked into the crowd, into the eyes of the old woman clinging to her rosary, the young man trembling with purpose, the African nun who had flown across continents, just to stand there, and he simply said, "We are one family. There is no east, no west, no south, no north. There is only love, and love must lead us." The applause that followed wasn't just loud, it was thunderous. It wasn't just the sound of hands clapping, it was the sound of hearts awakening. In that single speech, Pope Luis I laid the foundation for a new kind of church, a church not limited by walls or weighed down by dogma. He dreamed of a church that welcomes, not judges, a church that walks with the forgotten, speaks up for the voiceless, and dares to change. He did not ignore the pain of the past. He acknowledged the wounds, scandals, divisions, injustices, and promised healing, not by hiding but by confronting, learning, and rebuilding. Pope Luis XIV said, "We must not be a museum of traditions. We must be a living home of mercy." It was a turning point. World leaders reacted quickly. From Washington to Beijing, from the palaces of Europe to the favelas of Brazil, messages poured in. But this wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about something deeper. The world saw in him something familiar, something real. His election sent a message loud and clear. The future of the Catholic Church lies not in marble halls, but in muddy streets, not in gold chalices, but in open hands, not in exclusion, but in embrace. And it wasn't just Catholics who noticed. Pope Luis I reached out to people of all faiths. He met with imams, rabbis, Buddhists, Hindus, and atheists. He smiled, he listened, and he embraced. He didn't try to convert anyone with threats or promises. He simply loved them. Before we talk about doctrine, he said, let's learn each other's names. His message was simple. Unity does not mean uniformity. We can be different and still be one. That message hit home, especially in a time when the world was more divided than ever. In countries torn by war, in homes broken by politics, people needed hope. Pope Louis XIII became a voice of that hope, not with fiery speeches but with gentle truth. In Manila, children made drawings of their tatay pope. In Rome, elderly pilgrims called him Papa ng Mundo, the father of the world. And in refugee camps across the Middle East, people who had never known peace watched his videos and whispered, maybe things can change. He began initiatives that shook the status quo. He demanded that the church open its doors to women in real leadership roles. He fought against abuse with fierce transparency. He reformed outdated Vatican structures. He sold lavish buildings and turned them into shelters. He launched global listening sessions, asking every Catholic, no matter how poor or far away, what they hoped for in the Church's future. And people spoke, and he listened. He didn't just talk about protecting the earth. He walked through deforested villages. He stood in polluted rivers. He held the hands of sick farmers poisoned by chemicals and called the world to repentance, not with shame, but with tears. He told the world, God gave us a garden. Let's not return it as a graveyard. In just a few months, Pope Louis I became more than just a spiritual leader. He became a symbol of renewal. He did not erase tradition. He honored it, but he breathed life into it. He showed that being Catholic was not about looking backwards. It was about walking forward with courage and compassion. For many, his rise to the papacy was proof that the voice of the global South could no longer be ignored. The Church was finally recognizing the faith, wisdom, and sacrifices of millions who had long been at the margins. In a world starving for truth, he offered gentle clarity. In a world paralyzed by fear, he moved with joy. In a world drowning in noise, his voice was still, but strong. His coronation ceremony was unlike anything ever seen. Gone were the long embroidered trains and the endless pomp. He chose a simple mitre. He walked instead of riding. He kissed the feet of children before he was crowned. The crown itself? A modest one. For Pope Louis, I knew that true glory is not worn on the head, but carried in the psalm, heart. And that's what made him unforgettable. As the sun set on that historic day, and the lights of St. Peter's Square began to glow, the people did not leave. They stayed. They sang. They held candles high into the Roman sky. A sea of light, undivided, undeterred. And at the center of it all stood one man. One humble man from Manila, now standing on the world's greatest altar. Pope Louis I, the shepherd from the south, the son of the people, the heart of the future. A new chapter had begun, and the world, in all its chaos, pain, and division, finally felt like it had found something it hadn't in a very long time.